You guys believe in duendes?
Hell yeah,
Yeah, bro.
What?
I seen one. It was fucking weird, bro. I remember it was at this house that we live in right now too, and there's two glass sliding doors, and I remember the one on the right, it was open, and he moved in and he started waving down to like get my attention, like teasing me. As soon as I looked that way, it moves out the way. I couldn't tell what he was wearing, but I remember it was like small and it had like a red hat, and I was like, well, what the fuck was that? I thought I was tripping. I'm like, I'm just gonna ignore it. I go back to eating, and again it happened, and he does the same thing. I get up, I open the door, and nothing was there. And it happened like I kid you not 4 or 3 times until like I got up, I closed the door, I took my cereal, I threw it away, and I was like, man, I'm gonna go to bed. Fuck this guy.
Recently, my godmother, she told me a story when she was 7 years old. She was out in the front playing with her like siblings and stuff. Out of nowhere, she hears like giggling, and she doesn't know where it's coming from. And then she turns around, and then she sees 4 duendes, but they're like dancing and laughing, but like they're in the formation of, you know how like when they're holding up a coffin, like 2 people in the front, 2 people in the back. They were in that formation. They were holding a little coffin, and the way she described them, like they were wearing a big ass sombrero, big ears, the big nose and stuff, like the typical duende description or whatever. And then her mom turns pale, and she thought she was tripping because she saw the exact same thing too.
I know in the San Bernardino area, where like near Cal State, San Bernardino, it's like a mountain area.
Going up to Lake Arrowhead.
That's where like people still live up there, saying that there's duendes roaming around that area.
Actually,
They didn't want us to visit this island. This is North Fox Island in Lake Michigan, once the home of America's largest pedophile ring and CP ring. For years, this island was ran by a man named Frank Sheldon. These are the original cabins from the island, and children, yes, were assaulted in these very rooms. Frank Sheldon, the owner of the island, was the Epstein of his day, and he would fly children out to this island. Groups of men would assault them on camera while they were filming and taking pictures, and then Frank would fly them back to their hometown, drop them off, and no one believed them about what was happening. This right here is actually Francis Sheldon's original cabin, at least the ruins of it. But how did this happen? Well, Frank Sheldon actually had a private airstrip installed on the island. And guess who granted the permit for that? John Benet Ramsey's grandfather. I'm not making this up, truth can be stranger than fiction. We explored this island to raise awareness about what was happening here and how it's still happening today. The full documentary we filmed is on my YouTube now. The link is in my bio.
You heard about the terrifying terrorist attack that was planned for a Taylor Swift concert recently. If it had gone ahead, it would have killed thousands. Taylor Swift recently embarked on her legendary Eras tour. It started in 2023 and she's been performing all across the globe. She recently graced London with her presence, and adoring fans queued up for days to get a glimpse of the star. However, this could all have easily ended in tragedy. She'd planned to perform in Vienna on the 8th, 9th and 10th of August. To her fans' disappointment though, the shows were cancelled. When people found out why, they were absolutely horrified. A 19-year-old Austrian man was arrested and was said to have links to ISIS. He allegedly plotted to attack fans outside of the stadium and had collected knives and homemade explosive devices. It's believed that when officers searched the suspect's home, they discovered an arsenal of chemical substances and dangerous devices. A 17-year-old and another suspect were also arrested in connection with the plot. Taylor actually spoke out about this and said that thanks to officials, we are grieving concerts, not lives.
April 16th of this year, 25-year-old Michaela Standridge posted this cryptic message on her Facebook page. 5 days later, she disappeared. Michaela was last seen running out of a house that she was staying at near Concrete, Washington on April 21st. After running out of the house, she called 911 and could be heard screaming for help, but shortly after the call went through, her phone disconnected. Michaela made her last phone call approximately 15 minutes later to a family member, but she vanished right after and hasn't been seen or heard from since. The Skagit County Sheriff's Office arrived to the area where the 911 call was made not long after, but didn't find anyone who needed help. During the investigation, authorities searched the property where she was staying at and interviewed the people living at the home, which was on Skagit View Drive, but this provided no leads. It wasn't until Search and Rescue expanded their search that they found Michaela's phone, which was located near the Skagit River. Authorities have since searched the river by boat, drones, and helicopter, but Michaela is still missing. According to a recent post from Michaela's aunt, she is believed to still be alive. Because of her last cryptic message on Facebook, it's not known if Michaela is being held against her will or if her disappearance has anything to do with human trafficking. But Michaela's family asks that if you see her, to take a picture of her and to try to stay with her until authorities arrive. Michaela is roughly 100 pounds with blue eyes, and she currently has blonde and pink hair. If you have any information about Michaela's disappearance, please contact the numbers on the screen.
this child was missing since 2019 and has been found alive underneath the staircase.
4-year-old girl named Paisley Schultes was removed from custody of her biological parents along with her sister. Although it has not been revealed on why her parents Kim Cooper and Cole Schultes were no longer legally allowed to look over their own daughters. In July of 2019, Paisley suddenly vanished from her family home while her older sister was at school. She had been living near Ithaca, New York. Although the police strongly suspected her biological parents, they had no proof at all proving this. The police were actually able to search the parents' property, but they denied having anything to do with their daughter's mysterious disappearance. And the police could not find Paisley inside despite thoroughly looking. However, years later in 2022, the police received a tip that Paisley could still be in the house after all, and was being held in a secret hidden location. At first, it seemed nothing was off about the property at all. But after about an hour, one of the detectives noticed something odd about the stairs. And acting on gut instinct, the officer looked a little closer and eventually found a small hiding place. And when they were able to get closer and get a better look, they found Paisley hiding in the little small space. Paisley's parents were then charged with custodial interference and endangering the welfare of a child.
Is the worst candy ever made.
Nah, hold on. Let me really think about this shit, bro.
I'm gonna talk my shit. I have 4. So almond joy's part of that. I hate almond joys with a passion.
There's people that fuck with that though.
Nah, I don't care, bro.
There's like
I'm sorry.
big ass like audience.
I'm sorry, bro.
When it comes to like the minty chocolate, people love that shit. I don't like it. It's disgusting to me. But yo, there's a lot of people who like that.
Yo,
shit.
why'd you get canceled over some chocolate, bro? I'm gonna get tight. But milk duds are disgusting. Butterfingers are disgusting.
Ew. I know what's the top of the top, most disgusting, worst fucking candies of all time. If I see that, I will throw up.
What?
Red chili, some shit like that.
Oh, no, I know what you're talking
What
about.
is that? Even the gum is disgusting.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
The red gum?
The red gum is just like cinnamon flavored.
Who eats that candy, bro? You
I
know
don't
what I'm talking
Yeah.
about?
I'm gonna have you rank these from best to worst.
Oh my, I think this is gonna be harder than the candy, bro.
Snickers, M&M's, specifically the ones
yellow bag.
Yeah, yellow bag with
Oh
peanuts.
my god.
Kit Kats.
Oh my.
On June 11th, 2005, Todd Geib seemingly vanished from an all-night keg party. But 22 days later, his body was found standing upright in a private lake that had already been previously searched. At around 9:30 that night, Todd and his friends left a restaurant to go to an all-night keg party that was being held in an apple orchard in Casanova, Michigan. As the night went on, things started to get really rowdy, so Todd decided to leave the party at 12:45 a.m. and walk back to his apartment, which was only about a mile and a half away. Doing so, he called a friend to tell them that he was on his way back home. Over the next 10 minutes, Todd made a series of bizarre phone calls. At one point, he called a friend and said, quote, "I'm in a field," end quote, before the call ended. The friend called back and Todd picked up, but all they could hear was what sounded like heavy breathing, and then the call cut out. No other calls went through after this, and his phone wasn't used again. This was the last time anyone heard from Todd. He was soon reported missing, and an extensive search was launched involving more than 1,500 volunteers and police officers. Authorities even searched by air, combing through the orchard and everything around it, even the stretch of road he would have taken to get home. Authorities brought in bloodhounds, which tracked Todd's scent up until the start of the road he would have taken to get home, but that's where it ends. It seemed as if Todd vanished into thin air. But 22 days later, his body was found in a private lake just 2 miles from his home, right in the middle of an area that had already been searched. But the odd thing was the way Todd's body was found. His body was found standing upright in the water with his head and shoulders above the surface. Nothing was weighing him down, and he had no external injuries. His remains only had little decomposition. His clothing appeared to be completely clean of debris, sand, and that slimy green substance that lays on the surface of bodies of water. He also didn't have any insects in or on his body, which is unusual if somebody was actually in the water for 21 days. A group of former NYPD detectives named Kevin Gannon, Anthony Duarte, and Michael Donovan, and Todd's mom had an independent investigation conducted. And from that, they learned that while Todd had been missing for 3 weeks, he had actually only been dead for 2 to 5 days before being found. The autopsy report also showed no water in Todd's lungs at all. Kevin, Anthony, and Michael believed Todd was abducted, held on land for a period of time, murdered, and then placed in the water after death shortly before being found. Adding to this, on top of alcohol being found in his system, he also had traces of antidepressants, but he was never prescribed those. A pharmacist working on the case stated that those pills would normally never be given together because if they were, it would likely cause confusion and hallucinations. They agreed that both the pills and alcohol found in his system would have left him completely incapacitated and unable to get to the lake by himself. Despite all of this evidence, the Michigan State Police ultimately ruled Todd's cause of death as undetermined drowning. They believe Todd left the party intoxicated and just accidentally drowned in the lake. But Todd's mom and Kevin, Anthony, and Michael do not believe this. I'm sorry I have to do a part 2, but that'll be posted in the comments right now.
This is why you should never put your feet up on the dashboard of a car. Granny Keeley, an Irish woman, endured a life-changing car crash in 2006 when she was 22 years old at the time. She was the passenger in a car that skidded on black ice and collided with a wall. Granny's knees were then propelled into her face due to her feet being propped up on the dashboard. The impact occurred as the airbag inflated at a staggering speed of 200 miles per hour, resulting in very severe facial injuries. Almost every single bone in her face was broken and she suffered a brain leak, known as CSF leakage. Additionally, she lost 2 teeth in the traumatic accident. Following the crash, Granine underwent extensive medical procedures. Unfortunately, due to an infection, doctors had to remove her forehead, leaving her without one for 2 years. However, in 2009, surgeons managed to reconstruct her face by fitting her with a ceramic forehead. Granine humorously joked that her new forehead was made in Italy and playfully referred to it as a designer piece. This is Granine today, and she is now 38 years old, and it looks like she didn't even go through this awful experience. But sadly, she still suffers from long-lasting effects from the injury. She said, "I constantly lose my words while in the middle of a conversation. This can happen to me about 20 times a day." She also said, "I get headaches when too many people are talking around and I sometimes find it difficult to stay focused." So if you learn anything from this video, never ever put your feet on the dashboard of a car that you're in. Because you never know, this can happen to you.
This is a father claiming that Scotland Yard covered up a son's murder, reportedly involving a Conservative MP. That goes back some years.
You can't think of a more serious and grotesque allegation than that. We are, I think, in the early stages of a reckoning with our kind of past, of things happening on a scale and of a gravity which just a few months ago would have seemed unimaginable and almost too horrific to contemplate.
It's here, at Elm Guest House in South London, that he says he faced his most violent experience. It was raided by police in 1982. Newspapers at the time said that at least 3 MPs were questioned. It was being used as a gay brothel, and it was alleged children as young as 10 were abused. In the 80s, it was reported officers found whips, chains and ropes.
I was tied up here. I don't know why I was tied up, but I was tied up with my hands behind my back. I do remember that. Laying down, and he took photographs. Other men were here. Other men came into the room. It wasn't this one man. There were other men here.
35 years on, an officer familiar with that inquiry has come forward to tell its story and how it came to a sudden and mysterious end.
I won't believe anything that comes out now if it's got the government dabs on it, because it's been proved to be flawed, soiled, and an absolute dog's dinner, as I said.
The fact that she made that statement to the House indicates that there is still a huge amount that we don't know about. This is going to carry on until we have a proper, thorough investigation.
Jerome concluded that no credible victim has ever come forward alleging a specific offence suffered whilst at Elm Guest House, and that no prominent person had ever been conclusively identified as having the child there.
You know the chilling child abduction story behind the Amber Alert system? It was January the 13th, 1996 in Arlington, Texas. Amber Hagerman was just 9 years old. She'd been biking around the area near to her nan's house with her 5-year-old brother Ricky. She had a new bike that she'd been given for Christmas, so she was really enjoying playing on it. Now, the pair were cycling up and down. They weren't going too far, but it was obviously a different time back then, and children used to just play freely outside. However, within seconds, this innocent bike ride would turn deadly. Ricky told his family later that he saw his sister bike into a car park and then vanish. Another eyewitness from the scene saw much more than that. A man in his 70s reported seeing the child get grabbed by a man in a black truck. The man looked in his 20s or 30s, according to the witness. The witness then obviously promptly phoned police. Despite a big search for the little girl, they had absolutely no idea where she'd gone. They kept hunting and found nothing until a dog walker stumbled upon something horrific 4 days later. Tragically, in a nearby creek was little Amber's body. She'd been stripped and her throat cut by either a knife or a screwdriver. Her body was found less than 5 miles away from where she was snatched. Now, police desperately searched for leads but came up with absolutely nothing. The local community were really anxious to try and do something to help. In the absence of being able to track down Amber's killer, a local woman, Diane Simone, rang into a local radio station. She wondered if a national alert system could be created to send information to people about missing children, like they do for severe weather warnings. With that, the AMBER system was born. The acronym stood for America's Missing Broadcast Emergency Response. Tragically, Amber's murder still remains unsolved 28 years later. However, the Amber Alert created in her honor has gone on to save many more children who may have otherwise ended up dead.
Ever seen the video of it's a baseball game? They're like warming up and then a ball is about to hit the news person. And he turns around and he goes like this, the baseball player.
Yeah.
Do you remember what the news anchor looked like?
Was a woman.
What?
Blonde?
Blonde, right?
Yeah.
Evan, there's been a lot of changes this offseason for your team. How do you feel your chances are in the AL East?
I mean, I love our chances. You know, it's been, Dad, keep it on the field.
That's not fake?
That's how it is? Nah, bro. I called cap on that shit. There's no way. I remember her being blonde.
Me too, bro. I remember her being blind. I also remember her saying, wait, did you get that?
Yeah, I remember that too. These Mandela effects be tripping me out.
This girl was killed and had all of her teeth removed by a cartel member while on vacation in Mexico. The body of 23-year-old Lisbeth Flores was found dead in the Mexican town of Matamoros. The sad thing is, Lisbeth was a mother of 2 and was also visiting Mexico for vacation. On August 9th, 2023, Lisbeth told her mother that she would be crossing the border into Matamoros to visit her boyfriend. Lisbeth assured her mother that she would return later that evening. This wasn't her first time crossing the border, but for some reason, her decision to do it did not sit right with her mother at all. Maybe it was her instincts telling her something bad was going to happen. But regardless, she let Lisbeth go. However, when Lisbeth failed to return home that night, her mother knew something was wrong. She filed a missing persons report immediately the next morning. But tragically, the day after filing, Mexican officials discovered Lisbeth's lifeless body abandoned on a field in Matamoros. And the condition of her remains were absolutely horrific. She had been brutally assaulted and all of her teeth were removed from her mouth before she died. And the fatal injury seemed to be from a powerful blow to the head using this large rock that was discovered at the scene. Some say it was robbery, others say it was sexual assault, but no one really knows what happened exactly between Lisbeth and her killer. The good thing is the killer was arrested. Braulio Martinez was caught at his residence in connection with the murder, and after pleading no contest, he was sentenced to 14 years in prison, which many people thought wasn't a long enough sentence. This is just so sad, and due to the violence in this area, Lisbeth's mother is now without a child, and her own 2 kids are left without a mother. But luckily, local businesses stepped up by contributing funds to her children's education. As this kind gesture definitely helped, nothing will bring back their mother, Lisbeth Flores. May she rest in peace.
The former NYPD detective started working with a forensic biologist that decided to test if Todd was actually in the lake for 3 weeks like police say. Together they placed pig carcasses, which is reportedly very similar to human bodies in terms of decomposition, into a pond for 3 weeks dressed in clothing that resembled Todd's outfit. The carcasses collected aquatic insects within the first day, and by day 3, the insects had laid eggs. By day 21, the carcasses completely collapsed from the insect activity, and the clothes were covered in that slimy green film from the water. This test proved that it's extremely unlikely that Todd's body was in the lake for those 22 days. So they gave all of this information to the Michigan State Police in hopes they would reopen and reinvestigate the case, but nothing has really come of it. Kevin, Anthony, and Michael believe Todd is a possible victim of the smiley face killers. The smiley face killer is a theory, emphasis on theory, of an alleged network of serial killers that targets college-age men and dumps their bodies in nearby waterways. They then leave graffiti smiley faces at the death sites. This is controversial, but I figured I'd add this in because multiple people came forward and stated that they saw a smiley face spray painted onto a tree near where Todd's body was found. A card with a smiley face on it was also found on his grave. Todd's mom even believes that he could be a possible victim of the smiley face killers. But the Michigan State Police almost refused to look deeper into this case. They created a petition to reopen Todd's case with the permission of his mom, and it would mean the world to her if he would sign it and join the fight in getting Todd justice. The link is in my bio.
She sang one of the most well-known Christmas songs of all time, but have you heard about her horrific death? Kirsty MacColl was a UK-born singer. From an early age, she was surrounded by talented musicians and dancers. She developed her own talents as she grew up, and she frequently shone on stage at school plays. As she grew up, she became a really great singer. She was signed by a record label when they heard her on a backing track for a band. She would go on to have an extremely successful musical career, with one of her most well-known songs played in homes throughout the world during the festive period. In December 1987, she sang the duet with Shane MacGowan for the Pogues. It was called Fairy Tale of New York, and it stormed the charts, and she then went on tour with them. However, aged just 41, she would meet an absolutely horrific fate. In December 2000, Kirsty was actually on holiday with her two sons, aged 13 and 15, and her boyfriend James. On the 18th of the month, she decided to take her boys on a once-in-a-lifetime experience diving at the Chanakanab Reef. The trio were actually in a specific area of the water where boats were prohibited from entering. They should have been safe. However, tragedy struck when they reached the top of the water following their dive. A speedboat suddenly appeared, and Kirsty saw it almost instantly. She also spotted that her son Jamie was directly in its path. Thinking on her feet and acting on motherly instinct, she immediately shoved him out of the way. However, this act put herself directly in the speedboat's path. She was struck and killed instantly. Her cause of death was severe head and chest injuries. Now, the boat was actually controlled by a multi-millionaire who was president of a supermarket chain. It was owned by his brother. An employee of them named Jose Ken Yam actually took responsibility for driving the speedboat that day. However, eyewitnesses contradicted this. They also claimed that the speedboat had been going much faster than the men originally claimed. Now, Jose was found guilty of culpable homicide and was given just 2 years in prison. However, he was allowed to pay just a small fine instead of spending that time in jail. It was later claimed that Jose was actually paid to take the rap for the accident. Kirsty's family actually launched a campaign to try and get justice for the late singer and to raise funds for charity.
The other Epstein Island is something we need to talk about. This TikTok is incredibly disturbing, so viewer discretion is advised. This is North Fox Island in Lake Michigan. And in the 1970s, one of the nation's largest pedophile and CP rings was being run off of this island. And oh yeah, the guy who was running it escaped justice. This is Frank Sheldon. He was like the Epstein of his time. He was a millionaire socialite who knew a lot of people in politics, and the community surrounding North Fox Island knew him as Uncle Frank. Now, at some point in the late 60s, early 70s, Frank Sheldon actually purchased North Fox Island, so the island was his personal playground. And at one point, Frank met this guy, Gerald S. Richards. Gerald was a hardcore pedophile, and he and Frank came up with a plan. Together, Frank and Gerald created an organization called Brother Paul's. Their organization stated that they were flying disenfranchised children out to their island so that they could show them a good time camping in the woods. But once these children got out there to the island, they weren't camping. Almost immediately, they were forced to remove all clothing. Some of the boys were then assaulted on camera, and there are rumors that some of these children never made it off of the island. I will say here that the FBI has never thoroughly searched the island. They've never brought cadaver dogs out there, ground-penetrating radar, so it's unknown if there are bodies buried out there. This man's name is Adam Starchild. He was a pedophile lawyer who helped Frank and Gerald organize their organization. And together, they organized this thing so that they would get tax breaks from the government. That's right, Francis Sheldon was paid by the United States government to take children out to this island. It's almost like foster care, where parents are given tax breaks and other financial incentives to help these children out. That's what was happening here with Frank. But once these kids got to the island, it was literally hell on earth. It's unknown exactly who in all visited this island during the ring's operation. That's because, according to the FBI, all of their information on North Fox Island was lost in a flood. I'm not kidding, you can Google that, that is their real excuse. Francis Sheldon had an airstrip installed on the island so that he could fly in and out at any time. Here's a photo of some of the children from North Fox Island. I'm just going to let that sit with you, how disturbing this is. But at one point, a few brave children began telling their parents about what was happening on North Fox Island. This was after dozens, hundreds of children had been abused. And somebody in the FBI or the local authorities tipped Francis Sheldon off, and before he could be arrested, he flew off of his island on his private plane and flew all the way to the Netherlands. That's right, Francis Frank Sheldon never served a day in prison for his crimes, for victimizing hundreds of children. In fact, only one person ever served time in prison for this stuff. None of the hundreds of pedophiles that were purchasing this material produced on the island, none of the men that visited the island, nobody except Gerald Richards, the guy who helped start this organization. And guess how much time he got in prison? 2 years. And then after he got out, he assaulted another child and was sent back to prison. I actually visited North Fox Island recently while filming my documentary about all of this. It was extremely hard to get to, a 2.5-hour boat ride. Here's the airstrip. Here's a photo of Frank Sheldon's personal cabin, the ruins of it. And here's a photo of one of the cabins where the CP was produced. This island is also closely tied into the story of the Oakland County child killings. 4 unsolved murders of children, and that is a whole can of worms we'll have to talk about in another TikTok. If you want to watch the video, you should definitely go check it out. This is its title on YouTube. We dive deep into this entire thing, exposing all of these sickos. And YouTube demonetized my video, so your guys' viewership would really be appreciated so we can get the word out about all this stuff. I'm not doing this for money, I'm doing this because I want people to see this video. Here's my channel also, we're almost at 1 million subscribers.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
My 2-year-old son accidentally shot me with a gun while I was pregnant. My name is Laura Ilg, and I was 31 years old and married. I was doing laundry when my 2-year-old son went into my husband's and my bedroom. Normally, this room was always locked, but not this time. That's when he managed to find my husband's gun, which we had for extreme emergencies, but we never thought it would be used, let alone in this way. As I was picking up the laundry, I had my back turned to my son, when suddenly he accidentally shot me in the back while I was 8 months pregnant. I managed to call for help, and I was transported to the hospital. Unfortunately, I passed away a few minutes later due to my son's actions and my own carelessness. The baby I had been carrying for 8 months also did not survive, as the doctors couldn't save it. Unfortunately, my husband's gun took my life while he was absent. So, after hearing my story, are you in favor of or against guns in the United States? I'm looking forward to your opinion in the comments.
Teenage cheerleader has been found murdered in her bath. Lisbeth Medina was a 16-year-old girl living in Texas. She studied at Edna High School, and her mum had actually recently moved to the area from Nebraska just the year prior. She was recently absent from a Christmas parade she was due to attend on the 5th of December. She'd actually planned to attend with her whole cheer squad, so it was very unusual that she didn't show up. Her mum decided to go and see where she was, and what she found was every parent's worst nightmare. Shockingly, she found her daughter in her pajamas, deceased in the bath. Due to her being found in her pajamas, authorities think this may mean she was killed before school on the day in question. Police believe that she is a victim of capital murder and have arrested a 23-year-old man. This is 23-year-old Rafael Romero. They have not yet released the girl's cause of death. Her auntie has launched a fundraising page for her family, and she states, "Any support that you can offer to my family at this time, anything is appreciated."
These are pictures with the most disturbing backstories, part 4. Okay, here we have this picture. And the man shown here is just a chef cooking some food. But a little while later, he tosses his head into the fryer, completely deep frying his entire head with oil and dying. And the most messed up part about this is that there's a video of it. Apparently the man was possessed by some sort of ghost or demon, or he had some sort of mental illness, which was even noticed by some of his co-workers. But in the video, the man rotates his head extremely weirdly and inhumane, and just throws his head into the deep fryer with no hesitation, leading people to believe that he was possessed. Because why else would any sane person just throw their head into deep frying oil? I don't recommend anybody watching or searching up the video because it is pretty disturbing. Mainly because it just comes out of nowhere. 1 minute the chef is just cooking food doing his job, and the next he starts twisting his head all weirdly and throws his head into the deep frying oil. I will probably never watch it again, and you should never.
I caught a brain-eating amoeba while swimming in an abandoned pool. My name is Caleb Zielgelbauer, and I was a 14-year-old in 2022 when my family decided to make the most of the summer by exploring local fairs and looking for a seaside house to enjoy our vacation. We found a house with a pool that wasn't in great condition, but the heat made us overlook this detail. We planned to explore nearby beaches and continue enjoying local attractions. However, we had no idea of the nightmare that awaited us. 5 days into our trip, I was plagued by fever, searing headaches, and even hallucinations. The next fragment of memory I managed to retrieve is waking up in a hospital, confused and terrified. Doctors quickly identified the cause of my torment. A brain-eating amoeba, a creature literally feasting on my mind while I innocently enjoyed my vacation. To make the situation even darker, this infection has a staggering mortality rate of 99%. My family was devastated, and I had only a 1% chance of survival. Doctors gave me no more than 4 days to live, but I survived.
So this happened on Sunday. A man has been charged with aggravated assault and other charges after police alleged that he intentionally crashed his car into a Pennsylvania home. This resulted in the vehicle being lodged in the home's roof and the second story. At around 3:15 p.m. on the 6th of August, an incident occurred in Mifflin County, Pennsylvania. A 20-year-old called Evan Miller allegedly drove his vehicle into this home on purpose. Police stated in a news release that they believed that this was an intentional act. Joan Lepley, whose house was the one in question, says that she was with her cousins when they all heard a commotion. Joan heard her relatives shout to her, "There's a man on your roof and there's a car on your roof." The vehicle is thought to have collided with the embankment outside of the house, causing the car to propel upwards into the roof. Thankfully, because of where the car hit on the roof of the house, nobody was injured. If it had hit the ground floor of the house, it could have been a very different outcome. The driver has been charged with multiple charges, including aggravated assault, recklessly endangering another person, and obviously careless driving. After a man disappeared under mysterious circumstances, a random person browsing on Google Earth accidentally solved the mystery. William Maltz was 40 years old when he vanished. He disappeared from Lantana in Florida on the 8th of November 1997. Now, he wasn't particularly drunk when he left to go home, and he called his girlfriend at 9:30 p.m. to say he was nearly home. The police launched a missing persons investigation when he failed to return home that night. However, there were very few leads, and the case soon went cold. It would be an agonizing 22 years before there was any news of what happened to him. It wasn't until the 28th of August 2019 that a member of the public was browsing on Google Earth and noticed something strange. It was the manager of the Grand Isles housing development near Palm Beach who was looking at the area via the satellite images on the website. They noticed something in a pond that looked like a submerged car. Police were notified and sent officers to investigate. The car was removed from the water and had clearly been under there for an extended period of time. It had completely rusted, and inside, as you may have guessed, were human remains. The medical examiner confirmed that the remains were William. The area had been a building site at the time of William's disappearance. It was concluded that he must have lost control of his car on his ride home and accidentally gone into the pond. His family were now finally able to have some closure and lay him to rest. This horrific murder will put you off ever buying off Facebook Marketplace again. Denise Williams was a 54-year-old mother of two from Pennsylvania. She worked as a nurse and lived in Hornerstown. It was April 2021 and she needed to buy a fridge for her boyfriend. As many people frequently do, she looked on Facebook Marketplace to try and get one secondhand. She had no idea it would cost her her life. She found the fridge that she wanted and contacted the seller, who was Joshua Gorgon, who was 26. After travelling to his house to pick up the fridge, she never made it back. Now, her family's quick thinking at this point undoubtedly played a massive part in the investigation. They reported her missing to police and provided them with the details of the Facebook seller post. Police were able to hunt down the seller's address and turn up. There they found a hideous crime scene. Several knives were found, and it transpired that Denise had been stabbed to death. Her car was discovered in a car park of a Richland Township shopping centre 4 blocks away. Fresh blood was found on the driver's side door. Tragically, Denise's brother Bobby Williams Jr. had actually been shot and killed in 2013 in an unrelated incident. Her family now had to grieve another homicide. It's believed that Denise and Joshua had had a disagreement about the price of the fridge. Things had clearly escalated horrendously. Joshua had stabbed the nurse multiple times before moving her car and phone from the scene in an attempt to throw police off the scent. Investigators stated it was clear that Denise had put up a massive fight to try and defend herself. He was given life plus 24 years in prison.
This famous Hollywood actress allegedly groomed a 7-year-old and assaulted him when he was 17. This is Asia Argento. She has been in a lot of movies, including a lot of horror movies like George Romero's Land of the Dead. Her father is infamous Italian horror film director Dario Argento. And Asia Argento was dating Anthony Bourdain before his death. So when the Me Too movement was happening back in the 2018-2017 time, Asia came forward and accused Harvey Weinstein of assaulting her. She became one of the faces of the Me Too movement, which was a movement dedicated to listening to victims and believing them. Asia also claimed that another film director had drugged and assaulted her on the set of a film. But in 2004, Asia met young actor Jimmy Bennett on the set of a film. At the time, Jimmy pictured here was only 7 years old. As Jimmy grew older, he and Asia allegedly kept in contact. And in the year 2013, when Jimmy was only 2 months past his 17th birthday, Asia allegedly invited him to her hotel room, plied him with alcohol, and then assaulted him in a number of ways. So right after Asia came out and talked about her experiences with Harvey Weinstein, that's when Jimmy decided it was time for him to talk too. And quietly, behind closed doors, it was arranged that Jimmy would be paid almost $400,000 to keep quiet. Jimmy would even claim later on that he was inspired by the Me Too movement himself to speak about his own assault. Now, initially, Asia denied all of these allegations to news outlets and said that his story was completely false. But then, after these denials were made public, evidence came out. A photograph was published of Asia wearing absolutely nothing while in bed with Jimmy. And there were also text messages made public where she admitted to assaulting the minor and said that it felt weird and that she didn't know he was a minor. Now, Rose McGowan actually came out and said, "We don't know the full details of the situation, show restraint and be gentle to Asia." And people absolutely roasted her because what she was saying was directly in contradiction to the entire purpose of the Me Too movement, which was to believe survivors of assault. Eventually, Asia's attorney admitted that there was an encounter between her and Jimmy, and she was fired from her position as a judge on the X Factor. Now, there are a lot of conspiracies dealing with Asia Argento and her late boyfriend, Anthony Bourdain. If you guys want me to talk about those, let me know in the comments section below. Breaking news, a shootout between this guy and the FBI 2 years ago has just led to a massive arrest of over 100 members of a global pedophile network. This is a tragic and sad story, but I'm thankful that these people are being arrested and brought to justice. So this is David Lee Huber. He was born and raised in Louisiana, but he eventually moved to southern Florida where he lived for most of his life. And on February 2nd, 2021, the FBI showed up to his front door because they were serving a warrant for his involvement in a CP case. And apparently the things that this guy was doing involving the CP were graphic and disturbing, so they sent out a huge force to take him in. So when agents first showed up at his door to serve this warrant, he saw them on his Ring doorbell camera, grabbed a rifle, and immediately began firing at them. A lot of the officers returned fire, but unfortunately 2 officers were struck and killed immediately. These were officers Daniel Alfin and Laura Schwarzenberger. Laura was killed instantly, but Daniel was hit and managed to return fire before he was killed. So after an absolutely massive police presence showed up and began returning fire, Daniel Lee Huber then barricaded himself inside of his home, returned fire a few times, but eventually took his own life. This obviously led to a massive response from the authorities, and when they looked into the computers and devices that he had in his possession, they were shocked. So apparently Daniel Lee Huber had been tied into an international pedophile ring. This ring operated on the dark web, they had highly encrypted file sharing devices, and this network spanned the globe. And when they found out that this guy was connected to all these other people, an international investigation was launched. Part of this investigation was focused in Australia, where a bulk of the people committing these crimes were located. I mean, all of this was made public just yesterday, but the Australian suspects that were just arrested are between 32 and 81 years old. They're highly intelligent, as was stated on the release. They know how to manipulate computers and internet networks. And a lot of these members of this ring were producing and sharing their own CSAM or CP, which means that these men were some of the worst of the worst. But this led to an international investigation, like I said, and people were arrested here in America as well, a number of pedophiles that were attached to this network. So I definitely would consider this a win. Obviously, we don't know yet who was connected to this, what's going to come out of this, or exactly what these people were doing, but I think this is a step towards justice. And sadly, these two agents who heroically sacrificed their lives trying to protect children ended up saving so many more. But yeah, just here in America, 43 people connected to this investigation have already been arrested for producing CP, possessing CP, all of that. And I'm hoping they will arrest hundreds more.
John Jarvis hated smoking with a passion, and it was his hatred for his wife's habit that led to him killing his whole family. It should have been a clean break for this family when they moved into and started running the Winslow Hotel in Blackpool, but their joy at this opportunity was short-lived. It was early on in 2003 when John found a packet of cigarettes in his wife Trisha's coat pocket. He'd asked her to kick the habit multiple times, and she'd even signed a prenup agreement when they got married to say that she'd limit herself to 6 cigarettes a day, but to John, even one was too many. John had told Trish that if she didn't stop smoking, he'd divorce her, and he'd even gone as far as telling a friend that he'd kill her. He hated the smell of smoke in the house and on his and the children's clothes, and when Trish lit up a cigarette and smoked it right in front of him, he decided something had to be done. In March 2003, John and Trish went out to the pub one night and there was a psychic giving readings. What she said to John was the final push that he needed to murder his wife. She said, "Do what you failed to do 5 years ago and sort it out." That night, while he lay next to his sleeping wife, he reached into his bedside drawer and took out a hunting knife. He rolled over and began stabbing Trish over and over. She woke up screaming, but eventually she fell still and silent. But that wasn't enough for John. Shockingly, he decided that she could be resuscitated if she was taken to hospital, and she'd be then free to carry on with her smoking habit. So he did the one thing that he knew would stop that happening. He cut out her heart. John then saw someone standing in the doorway watching him. It was his youngest son, 7-year-old Stuart. He was shaking and crying. John walked over to him and stabbed him to death. He then walked to his other son's bedroom, 11-year-old John. He calmly said, "You're going to join your mother," and he stabbed him to death too. It later came out that in John's mind, these were mercy killings. He had stopped his sons from growing up knowing that their father killed their mother. He then wiped the blood from his hands and face and went and sat down at his computer. He started to write out a message, and it read, "Smoking by my wife to all it may concern. She never stopped, and if I only divorced her, I would always be reminded of the fact that she lied to me. So you will all see and learn I have given her and the boys absolute freedom. Forgive me for taking this drastic measure." He then typed in the names of Trisha's 2 brothers and pressed send. The next morning, John and Trisha's teenage daughter went to wake her brother for school, and she found him dead in a pool of blood. She found her parents' bedroom door locked, so she called for help, and the police eventually arrived. The police kicked in the basement bedroom door and found Trish dead and John laying next to her with a knife wound to his chest. He was still alive after attempting to take his own life. There was a Bible on John's nightstand that lay open at the Book of Revelation, and the passage related to the coming of the beast. It was propped open with Trisha's cigarette lighter. Leading up to the trial, it actually came to light that John had an undiagnosed mental health condition after being involved in an accident as a teenager, and he pleaded guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. The judge accepted this plea and he was detained at Ashworth Hospital in Liverpool, where he remains indefinitely.
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? There's nothing there.
This is by far the worst cartel video ever released, and whatever you do, don't go looking for it. Before I begin, I can't stress enough how bad this video is. Whatever you do, never go searching for it. The full version of the video is 6 minutes long, and the video is shot in the nighttime in some sort of desert location. You see the victim, who has been blindfolded with his hands tied behind his back, and he is also wearing a white t-shirt that spells out the cartel he belongs to. The scene seems to be lit up by the car lights, and the victim is surrounded by multiple heavily armed cartel members. They are wearing all black tactical gear and carrying high-grade weapons. One of the cartel members then begins to read a statement, and as he's doing this, the cameraman starts to move closer to the victim. After the statement is finished, the victim is forced to the ground face down in the dirt. Multiple cartel members hold him down by stepping on his back and pulling back his arms. The victim has been completely immobilized so they can carry out this awful act of violence. The victim doesn't make a sound as he awaits what's about to happen to him. After the victim has been restrained and pinned down, a cartel member carrying some kind of large knife slices a vertical cut on the back of the victim's head. He does this as a starting point to flay and scalp the victim as he is still alive. After the cut, blood starts to puddle on the dirt floor, and using the initial cut, the cartel member slices under the victim's scalp and starts to remove it from the skull. As he cuts, he pulls the skin back to ease the blade cutting underneath the scalp. After a few seconds, the back of the victim's head has been completely scalped. However, the cartel member makes sure not to cut the skin off in chunks and instead attempts to complete the scalping and flaying in one clean go. After the skin on the back of the victim's head has been severed, the cartel member then moves to removing the skin and hair from the sides of the victim's head. While doing this, he also cuts off the victim's ears. The back of the victim's skull looks like a red ball with shades of white from the victim's skull also showing. The top of the victim's head is then scalped. The victim is still alive, but somehow has yet to make a sound. Not even one scream. The victim is then turned over on his back, and as this is happening, a cartel member puts his boot on his chest to stop him from moving, and at this point, the victim, who is still conscious, says his first words, and despite the awful and intense pain he must have been going through, he tells the cartel member to simply stop stepping on his chest in a very calm manner. But as he's lying on his back, a cartel member then flays the skin off of his face. He pulls the skin that has already been flayed and starts to cut down from the victim's forehead. And as the blade slices under the skin, you hear a tearing type sound, which is just awful. After about 20 seconds, the cartel member completes the flaying, but he realizes he missed a few pieces of skin on the victim's cheek. He then goes back and cuts the remaining skin off. The victim also has his nose cut off, and what is left of the victim is a horrific sight. His head looks like a red skull, and due to the lack of skin, it makes his teeth and eyes way more prominent. The detached scalp and face is then placed on the victim's chest, and the cartel member then finishes off the victim by cutting deep into his throat, and it appears to finally kill the victim. The cartel member then cuts off his tongue and takes off his shirt. He then plunges the knife deep into the victim's chest and cuts vertically, exposing all of his organs. The victim at this point has lost so much blood that it doesn't even cause bleeding. The cartel member then reaches into the victim's chest and cuts out his heart. The heart is still beating, and he then holds it up to the camera. The cartel member then kneels down next to the deceased victim as the camera focuses on the still beating heart. The last 2 minutes of the video is the cartel member still holding the beating heart in complete silence. Nobody talks, and all you hear is the wind blowing until the heart stops beating and the video concludes. Whatever you do, please don't go searching for this video. Just when you think you've seen it all, a video like this surfaces. I can't stress enough how bad this video actually is. It's just crazy knowing that this is happening in real time to real people, and it's just awful knowing that stuff like this happens on a daily basis.
This is Peter Scully, one of the worst pedophiles in world history. I'm about to tell you his story, but seriously guys, this one is incredibly disturbing. It's so dark, and viewer discretion is really advised for this video. So Peter Scully, he's still alive. He was from Australia, he had a family there, but he was engaging in criminal activities, and he eventually fled the country and moved to the Philippines. And this is where the darkness really began. While he was in Australia, Peter Scully started up an international child sex abuse ring. The things that were done to these kids are, I can't even talk about them here on TikTok, but he also started up a pay-per-view video service. And with these videos, he was producing CP, but one of the most extreme forms of CP that can possibly be produced. So how did all this happen? Well, when he was out living in the Philippines, Peter Scully had 2 Filipina girlfriends. They would go out to the streets, they would find kids that needed money or looked impoverished, they would bring them back to the house they shared with Peter, and the things that went on afterwards are literally unspeakable. Remember, like I mentioned before, Peter was the head of an international ring of people that enjoyed the abuse of kids, and he provided videos for these clients. but his most infamous video was titled Daisy's Destruction. This video that he produced was so extreme, so hardcore that people on the internet, when they heard about what happened in the video, literally thought that it was an urban legend, and they thought that there was no way this could be real. This is an actual screenshot of the beginning of the video. This is a screenshot from the very beginning of the video. In the video, 3 young girls are repeatedly tortured for hours and hours on end by Peter Scully and his 2 girlfriends from the Philippines. They are beaten, they are sexually abused. I mean, I can't even describe, like I said on TikTok, some of the things that happened in this video. And 18-month-old Daisy. Now, keep in mind that all of this was on camera. That's the most disturbing part of this. One of Peter's victims actually ended up dying. They were buried in his house. And this sick individual literally sold that video footage across the world. And what's even more disturbing is that there were lots of people willing to pay to see that video. I'm not kidding. People were paying $10,000 to view this video. That is absolute insanity that there are people that sick out there in the world. And this is only the beginning of the crimes that this guy carried out. Some of the other stuff that we're going to touch on is absolutely disgusting. It's just horrific. And the story of how Peter Scully was eventually identified and arrested is extremely captivating. I'm going to run out of time here on this video, but if you want to see a part 2, let me know below. This story is far from over. John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown, did not act alone. This TikTok series is about to blow your mind, but there's a lot of information here, so proceed with caution. The case of John Wayne Gacy, the serial killer clown, is one of the most infamous true crime stories in American history. A brief overview of the case: in the 1970s, John Wayne Gacy murdered 33 young men. He buried them in the crawl space beneath his home and his yard, and he was connected to a number of different crimes. Gacy himself gained infamy because he dressed up as Pogo the Clown on the weekends and volunteered at hospitals and children's birthday parties. Now, the official story says that John Wayne Gacy acted completely alone. He had no help in carrying out any of these murders, but I really don't believe that that's the case. Through all of our research that we did for our podcast, we've determined that Gacy was connected to a number of other killers, pedophiles across America. And he even may have been connected to one of America's other most infamous serial killers, the Candyman out of Houston, Texas. So before we get into this, I want to state that I do believe that Gacy did murder some people, and I think he was very complicit in all of this, obviously, but I don't think that he acted alone. But why do I think that? So to start off, we need to talk about Jeffrey Rignall, this guy who was actually a survivor of John Wayne Gacy. After a night of abuse and essay at the hands of John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Rignall was allowed to go free. But what Jeffrey would go on to tell authorities and the media about what happened that night at Gacy's home is a major thing in this whole conspiracy. Now, Jeffrey would tell the police that while Gacy was essaying him, there was another man in the room. Now, whether or not this other man participated in the essaying or they were there to watch, it doesn't matter. Someone was watching this criminal act occur. He knew he could give a description of the guy, and he knew that someone else was there watching this happen. Then we get to Robert Bob Gilroy, who was a victim of John Wayne Gacy. So Robert Gilroy was abducted on September 15th, 1977. That's the official date that he went missing. He was supposed to show up for an event after that day, but he never showed. But John Wayne Gacy's plane tickets and records placed him as being out of the state at the time. His plane tickets from the time show that Gacy left Illinois on September 12th, and he didn't return until September 16th, the day after Robert Gilroy went missing. Already, these two facts point to a larger conspiracy at hand. There may have been people helping procure victims for Gacy, and he may have been even paying for these victims. And that's when we get to Philip Paskey and John David Norman, two of the most horrific people I've ever read about, and this is where the connections with the case start to get really shocking. And we've talked about John David Norman here on my TikTok before. This guy was connected with the higher-ups in the government. This guy had lots of political power, and he was a known pedophile. Remember, in earlier TikToks, I even told you about how John David Norman was arrested multiple times. He had Rolodexes full of index cards of the people who he was supplying these young men to. And both times, the police departments lost the Rolodexes and lost all the names of the abusers. But how did they connect to Gacy? Well, in part 2, we're going to talk about it. This island has one of the most disturbing histories in America, and no one really knows the full truth behind it. So like I said before, this island was owned by multi-millionaire Francis Sheldon, pictured right here. And Francis and a number of other local men from Michigan, including this guy, Gerald S. Richards, ran a boys' camp on the island. They would fly kids to the island on this airstrip, kids from the YMCA and other schools and communities in the area. And both the children and the parents of the children who attended this boys' camp were told that this was an island of fun where kids could relax. They had big brothers there. It was going to be totally safe. And this camp ran on this island for a period of years. Then one day, some of the kids who attended the camp began to tell their parents that the counselors or the teachers, the adults that were there on the island, had behaved with them in very, very inappropriate ways. They began telling their friends and parents that they were taken into these cabins pictured here on the island. They were assaulted. They were told to remove all of their clothing and that there were cameras all over the place. Well, it turns out that this guy, the multi-millionaire with political and business connections in the area, Francis Sheldon, was running a massive CP ring. And they had been abusing the children on this island under the guise of bringing them to a boys' camp for years, recording all of it, selling it across the world. And some of the more affluent clients of their business were even allowed to take trips to the island themselves to see some of these young boys. Now, this story bears an obvious resemblance to the story of Jeffrey Epstein, but there are some very, very strange things that are happening here that nobody knows about, and the government still refuses to talk about to this day. So let's talk about this guy, Gerald S. Richards. He was a gym teacher at a local Catholic school who went down for the crimes, and he was heavily involved with every aspect of this business, if you know what I mean. Well, it seems like through his political and business connections, Francis Sheldon was actually tipped off that he was about to be arrested and raided and charged with these horrific crimes. So Francis, before he could be brought to justice for these crimes, he actually fled the country in a personal plane. He then moved to France, got remarried, and died in Amsterdam, and never had to pay for any of the crimes that were committed here. But it's when we start talking about the murders that this story really starts to blow my mind. So take a good look at this guy, Chris Bush. This is Christopher Bush's father, Harold Lee Bush. Now, he was an executive with General Motors, and the family was obviously extremely wealthy. They were politically connected, and they were very connected to every business in the area. These guys had a lot of power. But back to Christopher Bush. This guy had assaulted a number of children. He'd been let out of prison, let out of jail in a very, very suspicious way multiple times, put on bail for serious offenses. And he was an alleged associate of the crime ring that was happening on North Fox Island. Meaning that, like I said earlier, he was one of those people who could afford to actually fly out to the island to do things himself. I'm out of time. Follow for part 3. This is where it gets juicy.